All right. You need to do some work? Gavin, you make a call?
No, like telling my lunch date I ain't going to be there, so.
We're starting 15 minutes late because of you, my friend. This one, he's twittering. That's cute. This one's on you. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time to be here, and particularly in these cramped quarters. This was a room that was used often by previous mayors for similar press conferences and other events. You actually can see the old wiring that used to be there. The cameras were actually all installed permanently, and they were taken out, I guess, under the last administration. And we, in the reflection of those years, we decided, hey, we might as well open this office back up a little bit more, and not just for periodic meetings, but for events. I'm not sure this was the ideal meeting, but we were otherwise going to be out in Sunset Reservoir. We were looking forward to coming back out and celebrating what we celebrated a few weeks back, and that was that milestone of our ability now to triple the total amount of solar output that the city is offering. But we thought it'd be more, be more convenient, clearly, for some of you that were working down the hall to get here, and so we thought we'd do it in this cramped quarter. So welcome everybody to, I think now, Steve, my fifth budget that I have submitted, a budget that's being submitted balanced, on time, at least as it's submitted, a budget that under the circumstances, I think does a lot of extraordinary things. And some things that are in this budget that clearly I recognize will be controversial and challenging that also need to be reconciled. And so I want to just begin with the spirit of the day, and that is I look forward to working with the Board of Supervisors. I appreciate Supervisor, the President of the Board, Chu here. I appreciate the fact that almost every member of the board is here, and I want to thank Supervisor Dufty and, of course, Supervisor Alioto-Pierre and Supervisor Maxwell. We spent a good part of our Saturday together, and Supervisor Mercarimi. I want to thank Supervisor Campos, Supervisor Mars, Supervisor Ellsburn, Supervisor Avalos, who will be the chair of the Budget Committee this year, and Supervisor Carmen Chu, all for taking the time to be here. I appreciate as well our Public Defender, Jeff Ajachi, for taking the time to be here, in addition to our Treasurer Tax Collector and Assessor Recorder, Phil Ting, and Jose Cisneros, also for taking the time. And finally, our school board member, Hydra Mendoza. And it's appropriate that we have a representative from the school board here, because we'll talk about schools in this budget submission. So thank you for being here. And I want to underscore how this is a living and working document, and how I look forward to working with all of you in the next 30 days to perfect it. I recognize it's not perfect, but it's as close to perfect under the circumstances as I can make it. You will now have the privilege and opportunity to work with the budget analyst and his team to make it better. And we will be here working side by side with you to address gaps and address concerns, unintended consequences of some of the things that may appear in this budget that can be addressed in real time. And then we'll suss out our fundamental disagreements on issues, but certainly look forward to working with you to reconcile some of those disagreements to the extent we can, so that we ultimately can come back here or wherever we choose by the end of July and sign this budget and move forward. This budget process began almost this time last year. In so many ways, when we submitted that balanced budget last year, we knew that we were going to have challenges. None of us knew the magnitude of the challenges we would face. You'll recall when we signed the budget on July 30th of 2008, no sooner did I sign it that I ruffled a few feathers by making it clear that the signature was conditional upon a restoration of some $5 million back into our general fund reserve. My core belief, and certainly our bond rating agency's admonition, that we needed to settle in at the $25 million general fund reserve. So we made an adjustment the moment we signed the budget in order to begin to address this year's challenges. We asked the controller at the time, you may recall, that we put together this budget improvement committee. We asked Ben at the time of that signature to organize, because we were facing a $250 million problem in this current year. And that was an extraordinary number at the time. Of course, now that looks so modest, doesn't it? But nonetheless, there was some prescience to having done that because we had the benefit of the controller's work, the benefit of his analysis, the benefit of his counsel and direction throughout the course of the last 6 months as we really honed in on balancing this very challenging budget. You recall, though, it was made more challenging, not just after the issues associated with Lehman Brothers in September of last year, but when the realities of that started to take shape. And the controller came to us, came to members of the board, myself, others, and said, look, unless we adjust our budget in the mid-year, we're going to be so far out of balance that we cannot meet our basic payroll and we cannot meet our basic obligations. So the controller came out with not instructions, but a framework of concern that forced us to take action, and action we took. And I think this is important. Had we not taken that action when we did, we would be in a completely different situation today, and we would not be economically be able to make the case that we were able to make the case in terms of the budget that I'm submitting today. We made $118.29 million of adjustments in that mid-year. Not everyone was particularly pleased about that. I think, in fact, most of you were very concerned about that. But nonetheless, we took action, and we righted the ship. And we ultimately got us back onto an even keel that allowed us to navigate in the last 6 months in an appropriate and deliberative manner without having our backs against the wall, without being in this hyperbolic crisis mode that so often is the narrative of budgeting, certainly in the state of California. So we made those tough choices as well in December. In fact, it was December 9th, recall, of last year that those mid-year adjustments were submitted. So a budget that began a year ago substantially was impacted 6+ months ago. On the 11th, just 2 days after we made that $118.29 million adjustment, we submitted to our department heads, many of them assembled here today, some rather remarkable budget instructions. 12.5% request on general fund, and then an additional 12.5% contingency, a worst case versus best case scenario. In essence, 25% cut instructions in December of last year. We also asked that we form a series of work groups to pick up where the controller had left off in the budget improvement process and to really drill down in areas of community-based organization, CBO reform, and areas like public safety, and connect all the public service, our public safety agencies, to focus on our civil service reform and tighten it and enhance it even further, to address issues of need to consolidate certain departments and functions, and of course to address more broadly the issues of revenue. In fact, it was Jose Cisneros and Phil Ting that led our revenue task force. It was Sandra Hernandez and our city attorney, Dennis Herrera, led our efforts on CBO reform. It was our controller himself working with Judge McBride and others and law enforcement, from the public defender to the DA to adult probation, juvenile probation, and others that worked, police, on the public safety side. Phil, well, it was no longer Phil Ginsburg, but the spirit of Phil Ginsburg, Mickey, and Steve on the civil service reform, and of course Ed Lee and a team of folks on the consolidation side. So that was work that was initiated as well in December of last year, an appropriate time. I'm giving you a flavor of the period of time we've worked on this budget. This wasn't just done in the last 6 weeks, or candidly, not even the last 6 months. This has been a long, long year. The CBO work group came out with an, I thought, outstanding report. Those recommendations are online and they're available for anyone to take a look at. That's a living document. By no means are all our recommendations submitted in this year's budget, but nonetheless, those recommendations were taken to heart. The revenue side of the ledger, we did take some specific recommendations to heart. In fact, Jose Cisneros came to us the fact that some 43,000 applications, or rather 43,000 he identified, supplementals that needed to be advanced around unsecured property tax had not been, and he needed a little support staff to get there. Here's a time when we're laying people off. He was saying, I need to hire someone to go after those 43,000 applications, and as a consequence, we were able to strike about a $1.2 million revenue generation because we were able to hire someone to go after, a senior manager to go after those uncollectibles. At least at the time we perceived uncollectibles this year. We also did something similar with the assessor's office. Remarkably, 11 people he advocated for, but 11 people we felt appropriate, and the board may feel differently, but we were able to mark the fact that we have all of these new assessments coming in, and we have a lot of uncollected property tax. This in the past has been something we've looked at, but never have we been so convinced, and Ben and Nani, our budget director and the controller, were a bit dubious, candidly. Phil Ting, when you came in with this idea. In the past, we've done that. You had some numbers that were extraordinary in terms of tens of millions of dollars that we can generate in revenue this year, but we scored about $17 million of new revenue because of your plan and because of your proposal and with the concurrence of the controller and our budget team. And so just to give you a sense, these work groups so often don't materialize or manifest in good news. In this case, these work groups very specifically have generated not just ideas, but we believe resources that will materialize in the next calendar year. Ed Lee's shop, you came up with 60 functional consolidations. And I say functional because it's not just about consolidating departments, it's about consolidating functions within departments. This year, we're going to, in this budget that I'm submitting today, we'll have 9 specific functional consolidations. One, just as an example, just as an aside, you have folks doing custodial work and engineering work for Department of Public Works. You have them doing it for City Hall. You have them doing it across the street at War Memorial. You have police functions and fire department functions. If you can consolidate those back office functions, you can generate more accountability, certainly, more performance, and save money. We marked about $2.2 million in savings just on that one specific proposal. There were many other proposals that, again, we couldn't get in the budget, but mark my words, we will throughout the course of the year. This budget, again, is by no means done. This is an ongoing process. Interestingly, the Department of Emergency Services was the beneficiary of also a recommendation of some of the work that EMS was doing at DPH, that DPH will no longer be doing with EMS. The function will go into DEM, Department of Emergency Management, appropriately. Again, another example. I'm just giving you a flavor of some of these consolidations that are also part of this budget and the good work that was done over the course of the last number of months. Civil service reform, other things we will save for another time because I want to try to move through this as quickly as I possibly can and still do it justice. Interestingly, though, we've already, I don't know that many know this, consolidated some 14 departments before this budget and eliminated 4 different departments. So these new 9 departmental consolidations go on top of that work that had already been done. We can do a lot more, we recognize, and as I exampled, we have a framework to do a lot more, and we will indeed do so. In the public safety area, we're blessed with a recognition that we can do a better job, Chief Fong, and to our presiding judge, Judge McBride's credit, scheduling some of these preliminary hearings where you have police officers that are getting overtime, and sometimes those hearings are not even held, but they're getting paid to sit around and wait. $6 million a year just associated with overtime and preliminary hearings. That doesn't make sense when we can reduce some of that substantially, and that is something we are proposing to do. We're marking only a modest, $1.2 million or so in savings this year, but we think that number can scale substantially more. But again, that's about management and governance and cooperation. But that was the spirit of that work group, and it's a spirit that Judge McBride, Police Chief Fong, and others adopted, and again, it's going to inure to the benefit of the general fund. And so again, I just want to give you a sense of some of these things. One that near and dear to many of us, and I think a member of the Haas Fund is here, Mimi and Peter Haas, they funded for us a very comprehensive report about early childhood education and how we can streamline our access and funding points for early childhood education. It was a remarkable chart. I wish I put it up. If you think government generally is dysfunctional, just look at funding children's services before children are even 5 years old for dysfunction. Not a critique, an observation. It exists in almost every city in America, but we now have a streamlined strategy, and that is also part of our efforts of efficiency and consolidation that are amply exampled in this budget. Also, Barbara Garcia, Dr. Katz is here, the Director of the Department of Public Health. Dr. Garcia came up with some good ideas in terms of grant making and how HIV services, we go after grants, substance abuse versus behavioral health services, and how we can organize those under this new, what she calls, community programs business unit in a more streamlined manner. That is also, again, just gives you a sense of, example in here gives you a sense of what's in this budget. Layoffs are in the budget, and here's the new number to add them up. And we include the mid-year adjustments that were made, 1,603 layoffs in this budget. That's not easy. It's about 5.8% reduction from where we were, 6% just last year. We now have a workforce that totals 26,198. That's the lowest it's been in, well, arguably a decade, but I can only go back to the 5 years since I've been mayor. It's 1,177 less than the budget that I inherited when I first took over for Mayor Brown. So there is a substantial reduction in the overall number of what we call FTEs, but real people working in city government. And I know that's difficult. I know that will be one of the more challenging and vexing questions you're asked, is whether or not to concur and support some of those eliminations of positions, but also the hundreds of people that actually receive pink slips. The last count, and it's a count, and it changes literally every day. The last count as of last Friday was 685 people that actually received pink slips that are part of this budget. We had a shortfall, you may recall, of $575.6 million. That shortfall is rather remarkable when you consider we had a general fund that is discretionary of only roughly last year $1.2 billion. It's a staggering number. It puts what the state has in perspective, doesn't it, on percentage terms. We were able to get that number down to $438.1 million, you may recall, in that joint report that was put together out of our office. We were able to do that because of the mid-year cuts, and we were able to do that because we actually, interestingly, did not experience the magnitude of state cuts that we had originally projected. It was originally projected to have $72 million of cuts. It looks like more like $18.4 million in cuts at the time. And wait till I get to the conclusion of my remarks today, because I'll conclude with uncertainty at the state level, and those numbers will pale in comparison to what we may be facing in the next few weeks as it relates to the state. That number, the 438, though, is the one that in the last 5 or 6 months we've really been organizing around. Again, we submit a budget that's balanced without taxing and without borrowing. We submit a balanced budget that guarantees there are no layoffs for firefighters or police officers, nor teachers in the city and county of San Francisco, that actually enhances our availability of slots under our universal health care plan by $9.45 million, that provides more supportive housing for homeless, and is a budget that remarkably is balanced in a way where I think people will, excuse the hyperbole, will be rather surprised, because it doesn't come close to balancing on the backs of our healthcare department or human service agency, as some had feared. And that's what I want to now walk into, because this is why I know a number of you are here, because you want to know, well, what is in this budget as it relates to HSA, Human Service Agency, and DPH. Here's an important fact. The budget for Human Service Agency and Department of Public Health combined are $2.11 billion. $2.11 billion. We will reduce, or in this budget I am proposing to reduce, not happily, But in this budget, in order to get to balance, I've reduced that budget by roughly $70.6 million. That represents 3.3%. I want to repeat that, as I read a headline today. 3.3% on $2.11 billion. That's a lot, but by no means is it devastating. We haven't destroyed the corpus of our fundamental social service safety net. 3.3% on a $2.11 billion budget. We did not experience, nor did we need to advance 25%, bless you, 25% cuts in the health department or human service agency. In fact, we didn't even come close to 12.5% at the Department of Public Health in cuts. The budget that supervisors, you had hearings and have been written about and talked about in terms of what came out of the departments was not the budget that I'm submitting today. It was not the budget that came out of the commissions. I'm not submitting that budget. I pulled back $43.9 million in cuts that were part of those public discussions. I actually, you should know, listened to those discussions, not just at commissions, because I actually participated in some of those and made presentations, but I listened to the public comment at the Board of Supervisors. Remember, I spent 7 years there, so I have a good sense of how it works around here. Wanted to get a sense of where people were. $43.9 million was pulled back from those cuts based upon that assessment. 4.9 in mental health dollars, 2.6 in substance abuse dollars, and some HIV and AIDS dollars, issues across the board, including IHSS. I don't know of a county that's doing this, that our in-home support service workers are being fully embraced. The state has eliminated the funding below, or rather above, $10.10. We pay $11.54. We're backfilling that in this budget. $15.7 million we found to backfill those IHSS in-home support service cuts. And by the way, Supervisor Alioto-Pierre, I know this, you care deeply about this. We did find an additional $3 million for the Community Living Fund, so we can continue that commitment to alternatives to Laguna Honda and institutional care. So those, I think, are just examples, I underscore, that things got a lot better than the headlines and the hearings. But they're still tough. There's still millions of dollars in cuts, 43.4 at the Department of Public Health, 27.2. And Nani, you chime in, because I'm going all in my head, 27.2 at HSA. Those are difficult cuts. I understand that. But 43.4 on a general fund of $410 million. With $107 million, Dr. Katz did a magnificent job, $107 million of new revenue solutions at Department of Public Health. 107. At HSA, $28 million of new revenue solutions associated with their budget. So that 25% was met, but not with cuts, is the point. The 12.5% was met, not exclusively with cuts, but with these new revenues. Let me give you a quick example. This is why you should never buy the frame that the only way to solve a budget is to increase taxes or cut or borrow. Anyone who says that's never dealt seriously or honestly with a budget. Here's why. $20.4 million of the solution at DPH is just by being smart in terms of the way we manage. You have functions, for example, at DCYF and even that Chief Zifferman was offering at juvenile probation, that we're eliminating from their budgets. That tells you one side of the story, but it doesn't tell you the other side. By transferring the money over to DPH, Department of Public Health, so that Department of Public Health can leverage federal dollars and state dollars. $20.4 million that we've leveraged by being more creative and thoughtful. By the way, though, that also includes community-based organizations, and this is controversial, that we love, that we fund every year, that were not certified, that are not drawing down federal or state dollars. And when you have to cut, those are the programs we said we'll cut. We'd rather send those dollars over to someone that can leverage those monies. So there are programs where everyone's going to show up, everyone's going to be upset, But I hope people understand some of the rationale. And Dr. Katz, I know, will be spending a lot of time with you trying to explain that rationale. So there will be, I know you're looking for controversy because it's always more interesting. There will be some controversy nonetheless. I'm not mitigating that or denying that. I'm just saying there's a rationale for some of these decision making. On the substance abuse, protect residential. Look at the efficacy and outcomes of outpatient. Save methadone. We don't believe that the efficacy is as it should be on a lot of outpatient drug treatment. Good people can disagree. When you have all the money in the world, I have no problem funding those, but we have a harder time when we don't have the dollars. But we protect the residential. We protect the methadone. The supportive housing. We may not be as aggressive in the overall housing strategies, but we're going to be more aggressive in stabilizing people in supportive housing. So there's more money there. The whole philosophy at Department of Public Health, primary care. 9,000+ new people that are uninsured currently in San Francisco in this year's budget will get health care because of this budget. That's important. I don't know another city in the United States of America that's getting more people enrolled in health care in this economic climate. So again, those are the foundational, those are the values I referenced in the beginning that are also protected in this budget. As difficult as some of those programmatic cuts are, and I know that they'll be made more difficult because they end up on your doorstep, not just mine, though they've been on my doorstep for the last few months. And I know how you'll want to restore a lot of them, and I look forward to working with you. And a lot of them I'm happy and look forward to restoring. I love no mental health and no substance abuse. In fact, I'd like that to be the first thing we both agree to in terms of any add-backs, so we don't have to live with that, though there are a few programs that I will challenge you to think twice about, because we do need to recognize not every program and provider is doing the job as well as they should. We used $49 million in the rainy day reserve. You know that. That's been out there. That's in there. 24.5 to take care of our teachers, and I thank the entire board and Supervisor Dufty for his work in advocacy and your work in advocacy, all of you, and former school board member, now Supervisor Eric Marr, has been front and center in this debate. That's something to be proud of, and we all should be very, very proud of that, and it's just great to have that agreement so early in this process, and indeed we do. We have some creative ideas. Good people can disagree on what a creative idea, if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but we have a new management contract, for example, at our convention and facilities, and we want to front load it. You want a contract? Give us more money up front. And so we're getting $10+ million for that. We have these peakers, and I know, Supervisor, we've been back and forth on these peakers, but I'd like to sell those peakers to save some programs. We got $10 million that we can do by selling those peakers. Now, those are just two one-time solutions. They don't deal with the ongoing issues, but are just examples of some larger dollars to give you a sense of how we get from 438 down to zero. We generate over $80 million in what we call FMAT, nomenclature for everyone here. Everyone gets it. Folks at home, I'll explain it later, but federal stimulus dollars associated with Medicaid, that's manifested as Medi-Cal, that is organized locally through our Department of Public Health and Human Service Agency. About 50 for DPH and about 30 for Human Service Agencies, so 80 million. So the stimulus dollars were very important in terms of solving our budget this year, and that's one thing we cannot count on, obviously, next year or the subsequent year. But we used all those dollars that we possibly could. Everyone stepped up in labor. Everyone will step up at labor. That was not a punchline, by the way. We had a tough time with some, much easier for others. Local 261, extraordinary, Oscar De La Torre, came to us, said, I want to step up and step in to help you. These are lowest paid city workers, gardeners, street sweepers. Not only that, he just committed to helping prepay the unfunded health care liability, first labor union in San Francisco to do that. That's extraordinary. You had folks at police and fire that were also extraordinary. POA stepped up, stepped in, 17 million in givebacks over 2 years. Firefighters contingent, supervisors, on some of your actions, so we don't know if we can bank this yet, but they committed some 9 million, 6.6 million that will help this year, but I'm hopeful that that could be advanced. We had Local 21 step up, MEA step up, MAA we hope will. SEIU we're feeling more optimistic. supervisory nurses. Others stepped up early, and Tim Paulson, thank you for all your help. I say this every time, and it's just true. We have the most enlightened labor community in, I argue, the country. I just don't know another city that's this blessed. You know, we did layoffs, we did other cuts, and we got concessions. I mean, with people that are really eager to help, it's just hard sometimes because people deserved those raises. And it was hard to ask for those raises back. But people gave them back, and SEIU will. And you know what? That keeps those health clinics open, and that allows me not to have to cut those $43 million in social services, and makes lives of real people a lot better. Not just the lives of their membership and their colleagues, but real people that are counting on them. So to labor, once again, we would not and could not do this year without you, and I'm immeasurably grateful. And to Steve Cava for his tireless efforts. The poor guy comes back temporarily as chief of staff. He's been and here he is at 5 in the morning texting me gleefully, so he knows that he was up till 5 in the morning, waking me up saying, hey, we just got done, as opposed to just beginning with some of these contracts. But we're blessed that Steve is here because he has a unique patience that, with the exception of nobody here, we made, and I'll try to sort of quickly come into to a conclusion here. $69 million went to public schools, Hydra. $69 million in this climate. You know, our After School for All program, remember, we don't just do preschool for all, we have an After School for All program, $20 million for After School for All. This is extraordinary. The city's doing it, and stepped in, and we're fully committing to that. We've got a lot of work we will continue to do with our child care and Wages Plus, another $16 million that goes in, and these are important things. Our libraries get more money, and we had hours expanded this year. I mean, talk to me, tell me, find me a city that got Sunday hours expanded in the last 6 months in this economic climate. It's rather remarkable and something, Louisa, to be proud of and thankful for. DBI and planning, we'll talk about them later. It's been tough. You know how down the permits are, and you know DBI had a lot of layoffs. The numbers are staggering. I think you're going to be down about 92 FTEs at DBI. Planning a little less, and that includes the mid-year adjustments. We're looking to be creative and maybe do 37.5-hour part-time positions as opposed to 40, so that when the economy turns around, we can scale those hours back. By the way, HSA did that in the budget. Human Service Agency did that, so there'd be less layoffs. So they reduced the hours we call part-time work. Others incorrectly call it a reduction of the work week. Incorrectly, Mickey referred to that. That's inside the beltway here, as they say, but an important distinction. But we tried to do our best, though I know the SRO issues and others, and we'll be working, supervisors. I know Supervisor Chu and Supervisor Avalos have been very keen, and we've been talking a lot about that. And we'll have to work through those things, and I look forward in this next 30 days to try to address some of those issues. Not everything, again, we could address up front. We had drop-in centers and paratransit and senior centers that were going to be cut that have been reported. Those won't be in any substantial way. Again, these are things that were pulled off the table. No, Park Patrol is not going to substantially be cut. Park Patrol is actually really working well, particularly in Golden Gate Park, keeping people safe, and Jared Bloomfeld is very eager not to see that substantially reduced. So we get there. We get there without, I think, the devastation that some had predicted, or some are even, some have announced even in some of the press. This has not been easy, and it would not have happened without Nani Coloretti and her extraordinary team. So if there is a round of applause today, let it be for them. All of them. Been incredible. Only Carmen Chu can appreciate those years as a budget director, and I know Sean Ellsburn, when he was here originally in the mayor's office for a little while, you know, how hard these guys work. And to the controller, Ben, and his team, you know, we all of us objectively rely on Ben and his counsel and advice to, again, their credit for being here throughout. And to Steve and others that have led this effort. As I said, supervisors, this is hardly done, and I mean this with sincerity. I think you know the reason we've gotten budget. Supervisor Maxwell, you know this. You and I have been here a long time. You know, we work through our differences, and we ultimately try to look at the budget as apolitically as we possibly can, because we don't want to emulate Sacramento. None of us. I know Supervisor Campos didn't come here to extend a 200-day standoff, or Supervisor any of you. We want to get this done, and I look forward to the extent that we possibly can to say that some of these things that I wasn't able to address, that you desperately want to address, that we can. And it will only happen by working together. If we decide to go down another path, then we'll just be our own worst enemy, and we once again will be our own worst critic, and deservingly so, because we don't need to do that. It's not in the spirit of this city. As difficult as some of these things are, I am resolved to do everything in my power to help us get to where we need to do. It's just at the end of the day a math problem, and so within the margin of reason, I hope we can work together to address that math problem. And now I'll close with the biggest math problem of all. The governors may revise, this famous may revise, came out a few weeks back. It projected, or rather recommended, $175.2 million of additional cuts to the city and county of San Francisco. Then the election came, the special election, and the outcome is clear. People wanted us to find an additional $5.8 or $6 billion. So the governor came out with those recommendations. He was hoping to do short-term borrowing with the federal government backing that borrowing. That did not happen, cannot happen. And so he came out with a second round. That includes, in that round, eliminating healthy families and eliminating CalWORKs. CalWORKs, W-O, work, opportunity, responsibility, kids is the K. CalWORKs. Eliminating it completely. We're the only state in the industrialized world without a welfare program. Not just in a democratic state, in a industrialized country without a CalWORKs program. It's so absurd it can't be true, right? Except that if you add up and do the math, it would impact 4,354 human beings. It would potentially cost us over $103 million to backfill that alone. Again, the 175.2 was the May revise. CalWORKs alone is $103.8 million, 4,354 people impacted. Healthy families, the backbone of our universal health care for children, in this case insurance, that would eliminate the opportunity for 12,000 children to have health care in our city, and would cost us, if we backfilled it, some $14.4 million. Those are just two of the proposals that were part of that $5+ billion second cut. And then last week, we had an additional $3 billion. Remember, the budget deficit was not $21.4 billion, it's 24 or 21.3, it's 24.3 billion. So there's additional $3 billion that we were off, the LAO's office statewide. So we haven't even analyzed those $3 billion yet. These are staggering numbers. Of the 175.2, just to remind you, $91 million is just associated with that Prop 1A, that's the borrowing, 91 million of that 175.2, of which 81.8 is general fund. It's a huge general fund hit. That's just the borrowing. And remember, they say absolutely we're moving forward in borrowing. That's a done deal, right? Because we'll pay you back in 36 months with interest. But that will hit our general fund alone. And that hits Muni, guys, too. And that's why I was just on this Muni discussion. I'm thinking we got real problems. I know how difficult that Muni budget was, but the big problems are coming. It was another 25 million just associated with the May revised numbers, and wait for the new numbers when you see all the rest. So these are staggering sums. The good news on the healthy families, worst case, we can replace the state. We could do a 2-to-1 match, and it may ultimately cost us $5 million. The good news potentially, here's some potential good news, on the $91 million of borrowing, we may be able to finance that ourselves. We don't know that we can do that, but we may be able to, because we know there's a 36-month payback, so we may be able to borrow that. But again, I don't know that we can, nor does the controller, nor does the budget analyst, or I don't know anybody that knows that we absolutely can do that. But I want to be forthright. But we're still dealing with a staggering amount of money. I included in here, and this is why I bring this up, $25 million. That's it for all these other cuts. That's not a lot of money. And that presumes, again, we finance, and that presumes we get creative. And that's, by the way, that $25 million only assumes that 175.2. It doesn't assume these latest cuts. So we're by no means out of the woods as it relates to the state. We can do our job. Historic budget deficit. We're able to balance without catastrophic cuts. Depends on the program. If you have a program and you're getting a service, it may feel like catastrophic, but the corpus preserved. But with the state taking its action, it may be immeasurably challenging. So I caution you on that final point. Incidentally, capital, someone I'm sure will ask, well, what about the capital budget? It's down because we want to protect programs. It's down from the general fund perspective, not down from the overall budget perspective. In fact, it goes from $373 million last year in the overall budget to 460, 373 to 460. So overall, the capital budget goes dramatically up, but the general fund drops from just shy of 70 million to 39. That's the general fund. And again, that was to offset these cuts that I'm sure you are pleased with, but not good enough, and I understand. Getting below 39 is going to be very difficult for me, but we'll have that discussion. I just think you have basic things you have to do with the general fund that we won't be able to do below that number. And incidentally, had it not been for Ed Harrington and the PUC Commission, we wouldn't be at 39. Had it not been for some creative financing in Prop 42 and the gas tax dollars on the pothole street repair, we wouldn't be at 39. So we got creative within that 39. Trust me, it's not just simple general fund dollars in the traditional sense. A couple other controversial things that you should know. I promised transparency, and I hopefully in all the conversations we've had privately to the supervisors that we've had the opportunity to deal with, I mentioned there'd be some Prop Js. Not because I wish them, but because I couldn't find the money to offset it by cutting other programs or services. Prop Js, for those of you who don't know, are contracting out. Very difficult. It's an ideological thing as much as is anything else. And it goes to jobs and layoffs. But there was one I couldn't, in good conscience, set aside. And it's not new. It's old, so it shouldn't surprise anybody. But in terms of transparency, it's jail health. We just simply spend twice as much as our peer counties for the same service. Twice as much. I'd rather use those dollars to offset all these other cuts, which I've done in the budget. It's a huge number by my perspectives. It's anywhere, Nani, from, we say 5 to 8 million just next year's savings, but even higher potentially on an annualized basis. It's a lot of money. But I know this is difficult. There are a few others that I've also submitted that in the past that I'm submitting again this year. There's 4, I believe. I think that's what I expressed to you guys privately, most of you. So they're in there. To the extent you want to take them out, I understand, but we just have to find the money. And I went through it, and I tried to avoid it, but I just felt it's the right thing to do under the circumstances. Again, because I was able to use those savings to offset those other cuts that were coming out of the departments. So I think that gives you a decent overview without doing my usual every single department. Remember those days? Incidentally, Luis, $1.9 million will not be cut at Grants for the Arts and the Arts Commission. So we added those back too, which I'm also, he's applauding. Because you guys made a strong case the other day. It's not, I'm not trying to get credit for saves, but I find myself as supervisors, it's important because I'm in the exact same position you are, but differently. So I'm kind of caught in the middle of the department heads and you, and trying to do my best to sort of fashion something to add back to get you knowing this, that I count on you to add back a lot of things that I do not want to see cut. And we'll make those easily identifiable because those will be the easiest things for both of us to work on. And I count on you to make sure that happens. So that's pretty much it. Again, if you look at it, depends on you want to look at it. 43.3 million or 4 million in healthcare cuts sounds terrible, but it's under the circumstances much smaller than we expected, and again represents a pretty modest amount of the total over expenditure. If you believe that we're making progress on public safety and you want to see that continue, then you're pleased because police department will not see any officers laid off. If you believe in our universal health care plan, you're pleased because you're going to see more people enrolled and you're going to get more folks housed that are homeless. We'll still be doing more than any other city in the state of California. We don't think that. We now know that because of the controller's work by a huge factor. And we got creative and we're more efficient and effective organization. We didn't raise taxes and we didn't borrow. And no teachers were laid off. I mean, you add it all up. It is remarkable considering some of the headlines. But if you're Jeff Adachi, you're angry about the layoffs. If you're my office, you're angry that you've reduced your own office by 28%. And some other elected officers haven't as well. If you have a program you care about that's cut, and it's cut, this is not a great budget. But the totality of it, I think, is responsible and reflective, and I think gives the board something to work with and not something that's completely untenable. And so I tried to do that as well. Those substance abuse and mental health dollars in particular, I think, are within the margin. You guys can add them back. Some of these other cuts are in the margin where we can get them restored. Some others, though, will be out of our reach, and those will be the most challenging and vexing. And so we'll be spending, as I say, a lot of time together. $6.6 billion budget. Went up 1.1% over last year. The general fund is $2.86 billion. Went down 11.1% from last year. I'll repeat that because I was supposed to begin with that. $6.6 billion budget, 1.1% bigger than last year, but the general fund dropped about $190 million to $2.86 billion. It was $3.05 billion last year. So this is the first time in my 15 years I've seen that general fund slide backwards. The overall, again, going up because of the WSIP program, that's the Water System Improvement Program, the bonds, and other things. That's why the corpus of the overall budget increases. The general fund, though, is the money that obviously everyone here understands and appreciates more. Steve Cava, what have I forgotten? Anything? Who did I forget to thank, which is the first thing you'll tell me?
The co-chairs of the working groups, Supervisor Alio-Pierre.
Thank you. Worked with Ed Lee. Thank you, Supervisor Alio-Pierre. And Supervisor Campos worked side by side with the controller to do all of that, and I thank you for that. Supervisor Dufty, always work. Supervisor, don't you want to get credit? He's not paying attention. We thank you for your. Yeah, you want to read the fine print? But I won't say a word. Yeah. The things you have to deal with as mayor. That's all I'll say there. And who else? Well, and Carmen Chu was also working on the revenue panel with our controller and with our assessor and treasurer and tax collector. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the budget. And I look forward to working with you all. Thank you all very, very much for coming out today.